And we are live. Hello, hello. Welcome to the March Town Hall. Please say hello in the chat when you join. We're so happy you all are with us. This month, we have the pleasure of talking about emotions and why connecting with our emotions are important, the tools we can use to connect with our emotions to help us in our relationships with ourselves and other people. And to lead us in that time tonight, we have our host, Jerry Holy, who's a Special Olympics Virginia athlete and member of Northern Virginia YPB and works for Special Olympics up in the DC office. And to join him and us in this conversation, we also have athlete and young professional board member Billy Duquette joining us, former Northern Virginia YPB and coach Pat Delap, who is now a Special Olympics Florida volunteer, as well as clinical social worker Scott Miller to join us in this conversation. So we are so excited that you all are joining us. Please, again, when you pop in, say hello in the chat. Feel free to ask questions and engage throughout. And we are looking forward to an awesome discussion tonight. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Jerry.
Well, thank you, Casey, and welcome everyone who's coming on. I know it's spring break for some folks in Virginia, as we say, of course. So I would like to start off on some of the experience I've had with emotions and such. And I actually have accountability partners in my work because I work for Special Olympics North America Unified Champions Schools. Yes, that's a mouthful to hear. Trust me. We usually say Sony UCS for kicks, but it's like I have a few of my coworkers there who help me sort of regulate my emotions. And I just actually had an experience thing where I'm like, moment, and they like one of them just like, hey, you just need to talk. And like, yeah, we just talked, got things through, and it just worked out well. And it's very good to actually have someone like that in wherever you are, like family, employment, around the world, even best friends as well. And I think it just makes things unique. And as Casey mentioned, yes, I am also the president for the Special Olympics Virginia Young Professional Board, along with Billy Duquette, who serves as our fundraising co-chairs. And sometimes just even having that, our staff of ours will be accountable when we have rough times as well. So I think it's worth knowing that it's always good to have someone to talk to about your emotions, as well as having tools on hand as well. But before we go into that, you want Scott, Pat, and Billy, you want to talk as well about a few things as well, if you like. And by the way, Scott Miller here is actually my therapist, so thank you for coming on for this, Scott. And I also would like to thank Billy and Pat because they're very good friends as well as mine for here.
Yeah, sure, Jerry. I'll go ahead. Yeah, I think talking about our feelings, either both on and off sports field or sports court, is very helpful. Sometimes we can channel our emotions for different things. Hopefully, not in a negative way, but more in a positive way to help relieve other people from doing bad things within the sports area. Most times, most people or athletes just need to, should stop, take a break before they actually react and stuff. So I do agree that we have to challenge and interact how we make our emotions both on and off sport field or sports court.
Segueing Billy from there and Jerry on that example today, just this talking about experiencing emotions and how we regulate them. This morning at about 3 a.m., my husky poodle was barking, and I have a 2-year-old son and a 6-year-old daughter, and if anybody has kids, you know how difficult it can be for them to get to sleep. And when the dog's barking, y'all, I was frustrated. I was maybe pissed off, annoyed. And so if I was going to dissect what I did that was helpful, I did something called role clarification in my head, which I do pretty quick. So, okay, what's my role? Well, I'm the dad, and my job is to keep the kids asleep. And what's the dog's role? Well, the dog must have to go outside, and that's why they're barking at me. And so I figured I could lay there and be mad and the dog would keep barking, or I could get up and take care of the dog. And there wasn't no sense in being mad at her. She maybe, maybe her belly was upset. And, well, that motivated me to get up and put on some pants and some slippers and take her outside. And I wasn't so angry after I did a little bit of role clarification and expectation management, because we're all those two things. So that was a little daily dose from my morning today.
And for Jerry and Billy, I know, and coaching them and being a part of the board, the Young Professionals board with Jerry and Billy, I know with experience with a lot of the Special Olympics athletes, most of the athletes are working a 9 to 5 or some form of work during the week. And for most of us, getting in tune with our emotions during a workday is not a feasible option. So athletics and working out is a good way to get into those emotions and relieve some stress. And that's when Jerry asked if I could be a part of this, I was like, it's a great fit, because I got to see both of them throughout their competition days and practices get to express emotions that they probably have to bottle up during the work week because it's work.
And I think, Scott, this is actually a good question for you. Is can you share why emotions are important? Because you actually gave a very good example. Actually, what happened this morning for you? Because I'm pretty sure I have dogs barking. If anyone knows, I own 2 cats here, and one of them loves yowling, which is called, and he just loves doing it. And either one of them might pop in the background of this, folks. If you see a black cat or a calico cat, that's them popping in.
So, Jerry, the question is, why are they helpful?
Why they're important, actually. Important
okay.
and helpful actually be a good way to phrase it, actually.
Well, I would say, first of all, say they're a part of our reality. So they are. So all mammals, all humans have an emotional response system. And one way I try to describe emotions is it's another source of sensory input. And so emotions are giving us information about our internal and external environment. And so they're important because they're giving us significant amounts of information that we can choose to ignore, which they won't go away until they're acknowledged, or we can learn how to interpret properly. And so what I'll add there is there's 2 common errors with emotions. And so if you think of like the stereotypical kind of masculine error is to ignore your emotions and pretend like they don't exist. And the error of that is kind of like walking around and covering up your eyes or your ears, or taking away some ability you possess and not using it. And then the other common error is to take your emotion and use it as your primary compass. And so your emotions are meant to give you information, but they're not meant to drive the ship. They're not meant to lead your life. And so those are the 2 kind of common errors that people tend to make with their emotions. Jerry, did I answer that? Why it's important, kind of?
Yes, you pretty much did there, honestly. Because I full-heartedly agree to that. I think if Billy and Pat want to jump in on that subject as well, because I would probably wrap it up saying that emotions are important to me because, one, they're the driving force of how someone acts and behaves. Basically, a good example is emotions lead leadership. And if you're a very emotional leader, you're one that more likely to lead from the front versus from the rear. I would dare say, if anyone knows Old Blood and Guts, George S. Pan, he was a very emotional leader. He always led from front and said he was always successful. Is there some things he did that irk people, but in reality, he was a great leader. You look at, I'm going to keep going on World War II references, Admiral Chester Nimitz. He was a very quiet guy. His emotions were quiet, but he led an effective campaign in the Pacific. Douglas MacArthur, his counterpart, was more flamboyant, as I say, and technically you can see how those 2 personalities conflict, but they still managed to get things done, even though their emotions went 2 different ways. So, Billy and Pat, you want to jump in right now?
Yeah, sure. When I look at emotions, I tend to look at it kind of like as a computer. Sometimes, I look at emotions and say, what computer part could be 1 or 2 of those emotions? It could be the processor, it could be the CD-ROM drive, could be the RAM, could be the screen, could be the mouse, could be the keyboard. and sometimes one bad emotion could lead to a failing computer part. So so we try to challenge what our emotions do on a daily process, especially within the work area, within competition, whether it's being in a social event with friends. We have to challenge our emotions to be either between positive and not negative. So that's how I see it.
I agree with Billy too, because everyone has their own range of emotions when they're dealing with themselves, but you have to challenge yourself to deal with other people, and that's how you're going to know how to deal with different situations, which are going to rise different emotions with you, and how to read other people's emotions. I'll bring it back to coaching with Special Olympics. Every weekend is a practice, and you have to gauge, say for basketball, it's 5 players on the court at one time. Every one of those players has different emotions going on at any one time. And if me as the coach or / leader, and Jerry was saying leading from the front, you have to be able to read and gauge people's emotions. And as Billy said, you have to challenge yourself to go through different situations so you know how to read people's emotions and how you yourself will react to them.
Yep. And I think going to that, because it feels like you could totally read, if anyone wants a very good reference, if anyone remembers the 2006 Final Four run of George Mason, where like they were more in the mindset of having fun, and when they got serious, finally they lost to the eventual champ Florida. They were just having fun. They were actually having fun with their emotions. And if you really pay to the one shiny moment, which actually does not even care much about them, or than showing LeVar Ball being cheerful and then emotional at the end, in reality, just in sports alone, it's like that. In which actually I could use a very good example of that when I would compete in the 2022 Special Olympics USA Games, which, by the way, if anyone's looking over was my left short, is actually my 2 medals and ribbon from there. That was just an emotional time when I got my first medal. It was just an emotional moment for me because I've waited for that opportunity. I think so. There's been a very good few comments from Aaron, and which actually I think the very first one of hers is actually something we could go back to, Casey, because I really like that one a lot, and which is actually something because I do love listening to music. I actually have, believe it or not, a calming music track on Spotify whenever I need to use it. I also use Spotify Premium with their mindfulness as well. And there's so much thing. Plus, also ironically, I do play video games as well. But I think in a mindset of how we look at emotions, people tend to box them into 4 different categories, which actually goes into a subject we're going to talk about a little bit more. But if anyone thinks, I would really want to bring up like some tools before we talk about my tool that's Scott showed me. And I think if Pat, Billy, and Scott have any tools before we go into that one, that'd be an amazing tool to talk about. Or those in the audience who are listening, what tools you use as well.
Yeah, there's probably a few tools that we can explain during the tool session.
Yeah, so I think actually I just remember a few questions that I actually asked everyone here is it difficult for you to identify your feelings and why? And then and that's the first one I'm going to say to everyone. You can talk on that, and then we can go to the next one before we have more fun on the tools. So if I repeat it, is it difficult for you to identify your feelings and why? And for me, I say yes, it is. And why is because maybe I'm just plain stubborn at times. And that's just being like, that's just human. I'm stubborn. Yeah. Or maybe I'm just not in the mood to talk about it. But like you guys or anyone listening, why is it difficult? Is it difficult for you to identify your feelings and why? Like go into it. I think Scott, this would be a very good one for you actually.
Well, you said something at the end there. You said sometimes I just don't want to talk about it, and I can totally agree with that. So I would say the first question, is it hard to identify? I would say I've gotten pretty good at identifying how I'm feeling, and that's probably just the nature of working in a clinical setting and practicing what I preach essentially. But I can identify how I'm feeling pretty good. Now, do I want to talk about it? No, not all the time. And I want to pull a thread through something Patrick said earlier. And Patrick, if I got it right, you were commenting on the idea of being an athlete and a coach. Sometimes you're working all day and you don't have time to maybe acknowledge or sort through your feelings. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Yeah. And I wanted to, that's a common reframe I hear. And when I think about the usefulness of emotions, understanding them, sometimes knowing when you can do something about it. So the first thing I try to teach people is to be able to acknowledge and notice what they're feeling, which doesn't mean that you're going to dive into it. Because sometimes you might say, oh, I'm really angry or pissed off because I felt disrespected about this or that, but I'm at work and I don't have the capacity to handle that appropriately. I need to get to my basketball practice or swim and just get some energy out. But being able to understand why we feel the way we do, even if we're not expressing it in that environment, is I find to be functional and helps people manage their emotions more productively.
Yeah, I agree to it too, because when I look at how I deal with emotions, I do think it's very difficult. For me, when I look at it, say if I'm at work and something happens wrong, and I have to go to my expressions of how I feel with my emotions. It takes me a while to process what I'm going to react to. It could be, something that make me mad, something that make me disappointed, something make me sad. To me, I have to process it to make sure what I'm going to react to, because if I react to it, something wrong is going to lead to something very, very negative with something. So, some people can process it much more easier, some much more difficult, but it's a process.
Billy, listening to you, it sounds like you're actually identifying your emotions pretty efficiently. What you're slowing down on, which I think makes a lot of sense, is what to do with that emotion and how to properly express it. And I think that probably you've got a lot of wisdom there to be careful about how you express yourself.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Aaron just brought in a good question: is there a situation where you have a hard time knowing the right emotion for the situation?
Yeah.
And it is actually, I really think there's like, honestly, I don't even know the answer to that, because I feel like, I think when you're feeling like a moment like something, then it's happiness. You're feeling sad or upset, then okay, it's sad. Like, I think it's very hard to judge, I guess. And I don't even know that. Honestly, I'm gonna say it is a 50-50 shot of getting it right, to be honest.
I have a question to this that I had a couple minutes ago, and I don't know if this is a good one, but is there such a thing as good and bad emotions, or right or wrong emotions, as Aaron is alluding to? What do you,
Jerry? This sounds like Mark Brackett's app. It's the emotional judge versus the emotional scientist.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. And we'll be actually getting into that. Actually, we could segue into that because it's a big good thing. But I think I have one other question to actually bring in is, I'm going to use the example that you have to serve. Do you have an example of a time you pay attention to your feelings about something and it helped? And honestly, USA Games is my first one, but I got to probably go with every single work conference I've been to, where like I have to be conscientious, like, okay, I cannot do something in this, but I think I'm going to use this one that just happened to me last month, because I was in New Orleans for a sports forum coaches business meeting, pardon me. And I think when I first heard that cornhole is like a sport or trying out, like I was sort of talking to a core, like I am not into this. And I tried it out, like, okay, I like it and I'm having fun. And then when we had our expo the next day, I'm like, I'm having a blast with people. And I'm sort of like, okay, I love this. And I think it's funny that a sport that I was not thrilled with, but now I kind of actually embrace it because like it makes sense as a good sport. And I feel like this may be a good one for you, Pat, to talk about, because I know you've been through a lot of stuff on this. And then we'll segue into the very fun subject that me and Scott were just talking about with what Aaron just talked about, and also what Caitlin's brought up as well in the chat as well.
All right. Well, I would reference back to knowing what is the right emotion for the right situation is, like I follow Billy, you have to challenge yourself to go through different situations. You're never going to know the right emotions that you're going to have in a situation if you don't do anything. You were skeptical of cornhole, but you ingratiated yourself, and then you didn't like it at first. Now apparently you love cornhole, but you wouldn't have done that if you didn't go through the situation and kept your feelings inside. You didn't tell anyone you didn't like cornhole, right?
I probably told a few people, but honestly, they feel like I'm being a skeptic at that point. Though I was a skeptic at that point.
Skeptic, but you went through the situation, and then your emotions changed, and they reflected by you participating and wanting to play more. So I would say finding the right emotion for the right situation only comes with experience and going through things. So it's never going to be an exact science. 50-50 might be even better odds than normal, Jerry, but you got to go through the situations.
Oh yeah, learning how to air melt a bag that has two different sides is very fun, and just learning all of the dynamics of the sports. Like, my goodness, this is more complex than I thought it was, but I took to it. So I think this is the perfect time about actually going to the app that Scott here introduced me, which is How We Feel app. And I think, Scott, you can sort of give a background on this a little bit.
Well,
Yeah, I think we have a little more discussion on this before. I think it looks like there's a couple of people that have some thoughts. So is it all right if we hang here for a second before we do the app?
I'm okay with that. I think
All
there's
right.
some.
We have time. That's the
Yeah, that's fine. Go get some questions here. Yeah.
And I've got a thought that piggybacks off of what Patrick's mentioning, and the question you presented earlier from I think it was Aaron. So I think I'm going to disagree a little bit, and agree simultaneously. So here's where I agree. I agree that the emotions can change, and sometimes things that you're hesitant about, or you're maybe afraid or anxious about, if you actually confront them or try them, you might end up liking them, right? And so that's where I would agree at. Where I disagree is that there's no wrong emotion. If you shift your thinking about emotions to they're informative, and so the proper question is, what am I feeling and what's it telling me? Then let's say you're anxious about trying cornhole, and you say, well, why is that? Maybe you say, well, I've never played it. Maybe I'll suck at it, or maybe my coach will laugh at me or something. Maybe my buddy will poke fun at me. And then you say, well, I can handle that. He's my buddy, and I'll get over it. And heck, I might even like it. And then you go on and try it. So I think that's where I differ a little bit, but simultaneously I'm agreeing with you. And Pat, I wondered, what did you think about that pushback?
No, that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree too.
So Scott, it sounds like you're saying, like, if we use another example, if you were perhaps frustrated or angry with a friend for something that they said, maybe they didn't mean to say something mean, but you took it a certain way, it's not a bad thing to identify that you might feel anger towards your friend for saying that, but that it's actually, can you make that connection of how anger, sometimes I think we can associate like that's a bad emotion, or we shouldn't feel angry because that's a negative thing. But are you saying that can actually be a positive thing to recognize if we're angry?
Well, I've thought to everyone. I think it's useful. So there's a school of psychologists that will use the phrase good and bad emotions. I'm not in that category. I would say pleasant and unpleasant. And I do that because I think that when we talk about good and bad, we think it's negative. But why I shy away from that and I use the phrase pleasant and unpleasant is because I don't know anyone that enjoys being angry. I don't know anyone that enjoys being embarrassed or ashamed. But I think it's useful. And so I don't use that good, bad. I use pleasant and unpleasant.
Yeah, I agree too, because most people think that that they be angry all the time. I wouldn't think that they should be angry all the time, because they might go through maybe a few days of being angry and stop being angry like the next day or so. So it's more common uncommon, I should say.
Yeah. And then to piggyback there, Billy, and then pull in case what you asked, it was something like if you're frustrated with a friend. Did I get that right, Casey?
Yes, something like that. Yeah.
Well, so I think one benefit to be able to identify how you're feeling is it actually gives you information. And we've actually been able to tease out specific information it gives us. So if I'm feeling angry, I know that I feel disrespected or mistreated. And so then the next thing I ask myself is, what do I feel mistreated about or disrespected about? And then I proceed. If I feel frustrated, I know that it means that I expected one thing and got another. And so the better you can start to, when you recognize these patterns, the better information you can get. And it's kind of like learning how to read. At first, you might just recognize that there's some words, some sight words or something. But then when you learn what those phrases mean, you can use the information more effectively. And that's where I go back to the dog this morning. I felt angry and pissed off. And my impulse, a PETA might kill me, but it would be to kick the dog. And I don't kick dogs. I would get mad if somebody kicked a dog. And my mom would be infuriated. If she sees this, she's going to be so mad I said it. I don't kick my dog when I want to. But I was angry. But when I said, why is my dog barking? Well, because she needs to use the bathroom and she doesn't use the toilet and she probably just wants to go outside. There's no good reason to be angry towards my dog. Right? So I role clarified and managed my expectations and got my butt up and took care of my dog because she's my responsibility.
It's true, because you might be angry within an hour or so, and then like the next 2 hours or so, like, okay, it's done. It's over with.
Well, yeah, it's like my Capybara when you're trying to sleep. He's like, rah, 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 and he just like, okay, buddy, leave me alone. Just let me sleep. She was like, she only does it if she wants food. So like, it's like, yeah, I like, okay, whatever, cats. I like you. I love you guys still. And that was great.
Aaron, yeah, I agree. Don't kick down.
Also, don't do it to Aham, honestly.
I just got a PETA email.
Like, oh yeah, he kicked the dog. Kick the dog. No, I didn't kick the dog.
Oh yeah.
Well, that was good. That was great. And that was really, I also like, Billy, how you framed emotions as like a one-time thing. Like if you're feeling angry or upset because of a situation versus every single day for many months, that might be something a little bit different if you're always feeling angry or upset versus sometimes because of different situations. It makes sense to me that those are a little bit different.
Yeah, I wouldn't say be like a month or week to week. I would say, maybe like takes my like day or so to get over something. Yeah, it's usually like a couple of days. I would say like maybe a day or 2 or 3. So it wouldn't be like a week or a month or year or so.
Yeah, especially if you're using a good tool to help you identify emotions, right?
Correct. Yes.
Which actually goes into the finally talking about too. So I think Scott can start tee up this one for a little bit because he's the one who introduced me to it. And then I can start talking how I use it because I'm actually on a 211-day streak with it right now, apparently.
Wow, 211?
Yeah, it actually does count streaks, surprisingly. And I have 101 unique emotions done there. So I haven't done them all yet, but it's kind of fun to use it. So I think if you want to talk a little bit, Scott, as we talk about how we feel, because you're the one who introduced it to me, I feel like you are more knowledgeable than I am, to be honest.
Yeah.
You let me know if y'all want the slides. At what point?
Actually, you could just pop it up right now.
Sure, I can do that.
I can use them as a backdrop. Yeah. So How We Feel is an app, and it is designed. I think the clinical content is designed by a guy named Dr. Mark Brackett, and he's out of Yale, and they established. I don't want to get it wrong, but I think the Institute for Emotional Learning or Intelligence. So he got some good funding to really do some good research, and that's where he's out of. The app, and Jerry, you might know it, or we can follow up on it. But one of these social media guys, I don't know if it was the Reddit creator, but he connected with one of the creators of these big social media platforms to say, "Hey, I got good content, but I'm no good at getting it out to people on social media." And so they partnered up to create this app, which I do think is pretty aesthetically appeasing or appealing, and is easy to use. And so, Jerry, I'll give a little bit more, but I do think that you're going to have some good insight from using it. The reason why I hand this out is to give some basic information on what our emotions are and how to properly use them, because we all are equipped with them. But I didn't get educated on how to use this until into adulthood. I don't think properly. Probably through sports, I started learning about my emotions and trying to channel them. But we all are emotional beings. But I don't think there's good public education currently on how to properly identify our feelings and what to do once we identify them. So that's why I offer this out to Jerry. Is it gives you kind of a simple paradigm. So let me see here. It uses this quadrant of, are you feeling high energy or low energy, and then are you feeling more pleasant or more unpleasant? So it gives you this real kind of more basic starting point. And then once, if you see those colors there, kind of red, yellow, green, blue, it then gives you a variety of words that describe more specific feelings in that range of, say, high energy pleasant, high energy unpleasant. So maybe high energy unpleasant is like rage, and high energy pleasant is like joy or being ecstatic.
Yeah, and I think I have to remember which one is my most used one. Actually, that just ended. It's like, yeah, upbeat. I think it is. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised with that one. That would be my number one because I'm upbeat quite a bit some days. But I think how I've used it because when there was a thing that happened to me last year, and this is something you recommended to me, and I just I got used to using it so much. I try to talk about it to people. I think the fun thing about it is I actually have a reminder at 8:30 in the morning, 8:30 at night, and then a midday reminder for me to check in. And it just helps me realize, hey, maybe after a workout or something, I feel fatigue, which is in the blue section. Red, I think there's an uneasy one, or rage, or uneasiness. There's calm and good, okay, in the low energy pleasant, which is I feel wouldn't that be more in the yellow half the time? But the yellow, the pleased and playful, or exhilarated, or excited, or focused, which is actually a big one I use quite a bit in work, and it's just so fun to do. I think I'm just thankful for you showing this to me, because it just a lot of people don't even know it exists. For one, it's kind of me learning about Microsoft Power BI for my own job. I didn't even knew about it until at least 7 years after the fact it came out. So it tells you that sometimes we're not aware of some technologies out there until literally down the road. I'm oh, cool. And this is just one I really do appreciate, because I have used it quite a bit. I've used it sometimes while I'm walking, and sometimes when I'm okay, I need to really just do a check-in right now. And I really highly recommend to everyone checking it out, because it is free to use and it's fun to do. They have some great lessons on there as well. And there's some good ones. There's even various things to sort of explain each emotion too. Now, I did recommend checking out those too. I might have to do a little refreshing myself sometimes, but it's worth it. I think sort of teeing off to Pat and Billy, what are tools you have? And I know you have some quite a few at your disposal there, Scott. And maybe even you, Casey, if you want to talk about this as well, actually.
Well, I would actually love, before we get into any other tools, may I ask a follow-up question about this app in particular?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I mean, you said you've checked in 211 consecutive times, or days? 211 days. What was it?
211 days.
That's a very long. That you are coming up on a year. You're or more than halfway to a year. I'm curious if you can identify how that 211 days ago, before you started using this app, how it was for you to identify how you were feeling a couple times a day versus now, your comfort level with identifying your feelings. Has it changed?
Definitely significantly changed. I think actually there have been longer streaks. So technically, I've been keeping this consecutive streak, but I think it would be over. I hope to eventually be, at which I kept the whole year going. Unfortunately, it didn't. So this is actually. So I'm but it just reminds me that sometimes I have to check into it. But since you built in, since the good thing about the reminders, it just allows me to think wow, there are times where I feel totally I'm out of whack or something, or I'm like one I just used just yesterday was fatigue from working out. Like there's some very good ones in there. I think sometimes I have a hard time recognizing what I have, and I think one of them's obviously like feeling annoyed or something. I think a red one too, I believe, in the red quadrant. So it's just remembering the moments of feeling in the moment. I feel like if you remember what it is in that very moment, it makes you feel better. I think it's just so important to recognize that, because if you don't recognize in the moment, it could end up being bottled up and you could end up exploding various forms of emotions and such. I think when it comes to mental health and that issue, that you don't want to have all bottled up, because we've unfortunately in the media we've known what's happened when mental health gets in there. I think we don't get enough positive stories versus the negative, because everyone focuses on the negative, not the positive, just a general fact. And I think there could have been numbers of people who could benefit from this, and we wouldn't have half the issues we have in this country, half of the countries around the world right now with some of these emotions. I'm not scientifically proving it, but it could have benefited though.
Yeah. Thank you for unpacking that a little bit. I like how you identified that especially in the moment, that sounds important, significant. So yes, I'll leave it to other tools now, but I was curious about more, Jerry.
I wanted to follow up there before we switch as well. Jerry, you had a quote at the beginning of our meeting, and it was something like emotions are a driving force in our behavior and acts, or let me see, how a person acts and behaves. And then there's another question: why are emotions helpful and important? And so I think like the benefit of this app is if you're someone who's like, I don't know how I feel, I don't think about that, or you're like, I don't have time to think about my feelings. One, I would say we don't want to ruminate in our feelings. So, living in our feelings and feeling that way, I think, Billy, you're saying that if you're angry for days on end, like that's not a good thing, right? We don't want to swim in our feelings, but we are talking about noticing them. And it's for the very reason Jerry said, is that whether we acknowledge our emotions or not, they're going to influence our behavior. And so if we can be aware of them, then we can be intentional about how we express our emotions instead of them coming out without intention or accidentally. And so I think that goes back to what's the use of identifying your emotions and knowing what they are, is so that you can express them intentionally, and the way you express them doesn't harm you or others or cause you some big headaches. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then a tool like this would be if you're someone who's like, I have no idea how I'm feeling or where to start. This gives you a kind of a basic foundation for how to start identifying emotion.
One organic tool that I see counselors well, that I don't use anything cool like this, Jerry, but it's very interesting, and I'm curious about trying an app like this. But one thing that I have tried to work on is to identify how I'm feeling, like how my body's feeling, like if my shoulders are tense or if my heart's beating really fast. That alone is like a tool to help me identify if I'm stressed or anxious or upset or feeling tense or nervous or anything like that. And so that has been it's challenging, that one, but that's one little tool. But I don't have any big tools.
Yeah, the tool for me, I actually learned about this back during when Jerry and I were playing for full hockey. A coach, assistant coach, came up and asked me this. His last name was Coach Dominguez, and he told me that breathing can actually help a person to be more positive and calm. So he showed me an app called Breathe, and I've been using it for like the last week or so, and it's been very helpful for me because it relaxes me, it calms me of any stress or any negative thoughts or negative emotions that I have for anything. And I tell you, it actually helped because last week, I had a very bad day at work, and I had my league bowling at night, and I used the Breathe app for 5 minutes after warming up, and it helped me be much more calm and relax during my league night, and I had the best night in my league so far to date. And it really helps because not only it makes you calm and relax, but it makes you, depress all the negative stuff throughout the day.
And I don't have an app or anything like Jerry has, but for me personally, it's always been dealing with feelings, work to work, day-to-day work basis. Nothing extreme happens too much in the accounting world, but having structure, routine, and some form of fitness throughout the day helps alleviate any of those feelings of stress. If you have a good idea of how a day is going to flow, you're going to walk the dogs, you're going to go to work, you're going to come home, you're going to go to the gym, you're going to have dinner, and those fleeting feelings of whatever they might be throughout the day kind of get squashed because you know what's coming next. And having that set structure, like right now I'm in Greenville, South Carolina on a travel. I knew I was going to work out in the morning. I know I have a lot of meetings. I knew I had this tonight. If I'm feeling anxious throughout the day, I know I have set things in line, and that just helps calm some of the anxiousness you might have about it.
And Scott mentioned that earlier too, and I just put it in the chat about expectation management. It sounds like a little bit like that too.
Yeah, so I want to respond to Patrick and Billy there. So that makes a lot of sense, the idea of routine, Patrick, because you're taking the chaos, right, the unknown, and you're ordering it to the best of your ability. And we all know that things can happen. And Jerry, you called it something earlier. Maybe it'll come back to me. But essentially, the unknown, when the thing happens that you least expect, those things will happen. But when we can make order or make sense of our daily lives as much as possible, it does reduce this kind of baseline anxiety or tension. And then Lupin and Casey, you were talking about these physiological markers. So what you'll notice is that when you start getting in tune with what you're feeling is that you'll notice that they have a physiological symptoms or physiological effect as well. And so then Billy talked about this breathing. So just like emotions influence our behaviors and actions, our behaviors and our attention can influence our emotions. Right. So then Patrick talked about you have a tough day at work and you're going to walk your dogs, or maybe you're going to go work out. And that behavior of working out, the behavior of engaging your dog or breathing, Billy, like you said, breathing, the intentional behavior can then shift your mood state or your emotion. And so it's a two-way street. And then why is it important to understand that? Because then, you can live your life more intentionally and not be at the whims and mercy of your fleeting emotions, because that's chaotic. And then it causes lots of stress. Right. Yeah.
That's very helpful.
Okay.
I love that. And I love that example of the breathing. I think that was great.
So many cool. Oh, and that goes back, Jerry, she talked about the GMU Final Four run. So when they were playful, they're light and they're loose, right? And then you're in this free spirit. But when you start to get serious, the physiological response is you can physically have full muscle contractions. And then we'll go to Patrick's expertise. Well, if you're a basketball player, do you want to be loose or do you want to be tight? Yeah. Probably.
Or you want to be like Caitlin Clark, who surprisingly makes $3.1 million in NIL deals, apparently. But
hey, good for her. I'm happy for her.
I'm sure
but if you look at how I'm gonna actually bring in basketball analogies. I don't know why I just like doing this March Madness, I guess, right now. If you look like a Caitlin Clark, Cameron Brinky, some of the best players in the women's game, like they're very loose and fun. I think they enjoy themselves. I think on the men's side, I think it's literally the emotion of having fun versus this. I think looking at just the women's side of the bracket right now, where I know the dread LSU Iowa rematch up is going to happen. The question is who's going to be in check of their emotions, because if anyone recalled the end of the South Carolina LSU women's title game, emotions just went flying everywhere, and basically no one could control themselves. I think Coach Don for South Carolina actually encapsulated very well what happened, and sort of goes on being more positive what happened. Whereas the LSU coach, who many people already know who she's like, all right, I'm not Kim, I can never say is went a totally different direction of it. But there's also, she's done some interesting moments too. Like just recently, I think there was a picture of her sort of giving a pep talk to one of the Middle Tennessee players. How she was doing, like it could be interpreted various different ways. But like you look at how all these players do things, and it's so much fun thinking about it. And I think one thing about this, because I'm in an R phase right now. Imagining R having a shock face or having a GER face, that's a pure moment if it's telling you like what the heck's going on. R's are a very fun way to talk about emotions. Like Amos can convey it very well. I think surprisingly, and I just found this fact out randomly, that cats have 300 facial expressions and they all look the same, but pretty sure they express it more in their tails and their eyes. It's the nuances, ironically, and everyone totally forgets about the nuances more than anything. I don't know why, they just do.
Well, Jerry, for one, that Mason run broke my heart because I'm a UConn fan. If you remember, my parents went to UConn. My dog's name is Shabazz. So,
Oh yeah.
but that goes back to your basketball analogies. When coaching 5 individual athletes, you have to gauge each individual's emotion, but you can't do that unless you have your own in check. Because if you're too emotional to an emotional player, you're going to have the LSU situation.
Yep, I agree.
Or we can have basically how the men's is going right now. I think North Carolina playing well, UConn, Houston, and Purdue. I'm actually rooting for Gonzaga, ironically, just because they're mid-major. But if you look at how everyone's playing right now, just look at the Oakland player beat Kentucky. Like the guy's like amazing, and like I know they got beat up by NC State, but if you look at there's these guys all these people need to be happy for what they did. And I think this is an opportunity to say like, hey, going back to that, mental health and emotions are important. You just take things in stride. Honestly, with my medals from USA Games, I took them in stride, being happy about it. When I actually found out I was selected, a lot of people know me for being chatterbox. I was the complete polar opposite when I found out. I was just like dead silent. And even when I was walking into opening service, I got emotional. And David Thomason, who's our president for Special Education, I said, well, why are you doing it? I'm like, it's just so all these emotions are going, he's just take it in. And it was like a moment for me to take it all in, because after winning that first, actually placing silver medal in my 100-yard breaststroke, my mom and I were just literally having an emotional moment. My dad and stepmom were there, and like mom says she was very proud of me, and I was just breaking down in tears. I wish ESPN caught that, but ESPN only cared about gold medalists apparently. But that's just the love of the sport, and it's just the raw emotion of things there. I think a lot of people don't get that. I think that's what sports is. We're constantly talking about sports here, but sports is the main drive, is the catalyst for such things. But if you look at it, we have raw emotions for everything. Like my brother just got married last October, and him and I actually had a brief moment where basically he knows I don't like to be called, because me and my dad had the same name. That's why I used my middle initial. He hears, yeah, that's my bad. But me and him both understanding each other, because we grew up doing sports together. My sister understands it to the degree too, because she got emotional with watching me compete at USA Games as well. There's so much emotion, moments of happiness and sadness, and I think the people, I'm gonna say this not because I'm trying to avoid a certain subject matter, is that some people drive emotions to do some not so good things, and people know what can happen to that. I think we should not let such things happen. We should be dictating our own feelings about the moment and process it more than basically just go on instinct.
Well, that's the purpose of Special Olympics, really. Sports is the great equalizer. Growing up, I mentioned my older brother. We didn't relate on most things in life, but being from Reading, PA, we related on watching the Eagles play on Sunday because that was our passion. Our parents went to UConn, so we watched every UConn game together. Sports was our equalizer. That brought us together, just like it brought you, me, and Billy together.
Yeah, I agree on that because sports is what drives me and my sister. When we growing up, we were growing up in times, watching, good baseball games and basketball games, and once, we got into Special Olympics, that's what drove us to what we are today, being great competitors. And I'll comment on what Jerry said. When I received my my Athlete of the Year award, back when Rick Jeffries was the president for Special Olympics, I was feeling very excited, and my family were excited of seeing me, cherish this moment. So yeah, I do think sports in general, can make people's emotions, good and bad all together.
Yeah, I think this is actually sitting, and we're identifying emotions and your health are connected. I think for me, if my emotions are totally like off the scale, I am totally not going to be in a good mood to do anything. It's like the reality is like one, I rather be in a more happier mood and actually work and be able to work out. Like this today, I had a 4 o'clock call and I wanted to go running and I'm not sure. I'll save it for another day. But I still went on a very long walk to decompress because I realized I still need to keep myself in check because it's needed. Because one of the things I enjoy doing is actually just exercising, and I think our health and our emotions are connected regardless. Everyone thinks they're not. That's why what it's called mental health in this case. And I think Scott, you can sort of tap in on this as well. Is that they're both interconnected no matter what, because our physical health, mental health need to all be in sync. Because otherwise, if one's off, the other one throws everything off kilter in the end. And I think because I'm no licensed therapist to talk about it, but that's how I look at it. Is they're both basically a scale in which if one's higher than the other, they're not balanced.
I think that tie between physical and mental health is so significant, and I think it taps into another great rationale for Special Olympics and opening up sport to a broader pool of people. And if I could, I think that all people should have some type of physical activity that they engage in through the lifespan. It's good for all of us for a variety of reasons. The two best and most efficient stress relievers are crying and vigorous exercise. And so depending on the context, you might not want to stop crying or go ahead and get it out. Or if you can go for a good run, that might be a good idea too. But then I can add that on top of that, there's been no pharmaceutical, say for depression, that has better efficacy than physical in a physical training program. And so we'll have to double check and we maybe add that to the notes about what the specific protocol was they used as the measure. But I can say that with a good confidence. Okay.
I can speak from personal experience. It's a concept that's if you know David Goggins, that you got to do hard things because you're training your brain to say, I'm better, I can beat these emotions. I'm doing this hard run. That moments of anxiousness is now fleeting because I'm doing this hard thing. Look what I just accomplished. And that's why the structure, routine, and fitness of some sort every single day, no matter what, it's non-negotiable because that helps monitor and alleviate some emotions.
And sometimes, if emotions get people better, sometimes, you could say, hey, let's talk about a joke, a nice, wonderful joke. Try to be laughing about the joke to neuralize those emotions.
Yeah. So Billy, what you're saying there, and then Aaron in the chat said, sometimes she'll imagine Luigi on a skateboard. And so I'll put the plug. So Jerry said at the beginning, emotions influence our behavior, but the And here's another thing to remember: you cannot directly control your emotions, but you can influence them. And it's the two ways we just said. Your behavior can influence your emotion, and then your intentional thought. And Billy, that's what you were just saying with thinking about a joke, imagining Luigi on a skateboard, imagining an otter, right? So having a funny visual to think of when everything's falling apart and you just need to hang on is a good way, as you put, Billy, to neutralize that unpleasant emotion.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think Erin's the MVP in the comments for sure. She gets MVP. Yes, we were about to give out an award. Erin, you just got yourself an MVP award. That's a big shout out from someone like me. It's really fun to look at things. And I know Caitlin just brought a very good comment too. I think I like to wrap it up on a very positive note. I know I would surf easily because if anyone knows, I actually host a podcast show myself. I never brought it up in the show until now.
Is this a paid advertisement?
I was thinking about it, Jerry, when you said there's only bad news. I was thinking about good vibes.
Yeah, good vibes. I know.
The Good Vibes show, folks.
Too,
I highly recommend listening to it because one, it actually kind of is my way of sort of getting out some negativity on me, but also telling people, hey, everyone deserves appreciation and support, positive uplifting lives. Billy's been on the show.
Yes,
So I highly recommend people listening to it. I just think that's a great thing. I know I would totally throw a sales pitch in for it, but it's an amazing thing to tell people that some people could take their emotions and do something productive. And that's what I did during COVID, and I've kept going with it. I'm actually coming up on my 4th year of hosting. I'm already in my 11th season. I feel it's like ages since I did it. So I just recommend to everyone, find a very good way, the outlets of physical activity, podcasting, playing video games, you name it, just do it. Just get those emotions out because sometimes you just need to get them out.
I love it. Put them in an app.
That too.
This has been great. Thank you, Jerry. Thanks, everyone. This has been really fantastic conversation, just hearing what everyone has to say. Jerry, I'll let you close out, but if anyone else has anything that you'd like to contribute before we end, then please do.
So everyone wants to go first before I do my closing monologue. Be my guest.
Yeah, it was very nice to meet each of you, and I enjoyed chatting with you tonight. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's good fun, catching up with you, Coach Patrick, down in South Carolina.
Yep. So I think when I can encompass this whole conversation, which has been very good, is that sometimes we need to understand that our emotions drive everything. And I think I wish there's a famous quote that Ermo Nimitz used. It was it was like, so I have to remember the phrase, but it's actually referring to the Battle of Iwo Jima, whereas uncommon valor was a common virtue, in which literally the emotions running through that whole battle, in which everyone thought it was going to be a cakewalk, and if anyone reads up on history like they do, you realize it never was. That every man, every Marine, every corpsman, every person who was involved in that operation did something. And I think emotions are uncommon valor that we need to realize they are a common virtue for ourselves. And I think we have to remember our emotions are vital, our mental health is important. And we always have to make sure that. So I always highly recommend people to find that certain person to be your accountability partner. Use an app. You host a podcast. Do sports. Do what you need to. Get it right now. Unfortunately, my cat's never showed up, but I'd be totally holding big air right now. And someone would say, have a emotional support stuffed animal, which I actually have one called Oscar the Artist. So I think it's so fun to know that our emotions are an important thing in our lives, and it's all right to feel them. We just sometimes have to appreciate the moment we live in. And I think that's what you take the opportunity to do. Appreciate the moment and understand those emotions. Because if you don't, you may not get a second chance at it. And I think I appreciate every moment of my day. Even there's times where I have negative thoughts. To be honest, everyone does. Just take that moment there and be like, hey, I'm appreciated. I am loved. I am respected, all that stuff. Because in the end, people value people in the end, and that's what we are. Some people may not, but in reality, we should all value each other as human beings in the end.
Amen.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thanks all who joined.
Thank you.